3-day tickets, 7-day
Yeah,
tickets.
3, 7, 14. I don't know what the
Yeah.
options.
Yeah,
But
many options there.
but just don't do what Tyler did because you'll be deported.
And actually, nowadays, the cheap airlines, if you fly from just like Tokyo to Hiroshima, cheap
Yeah.
airplane is cheaper.
Now, in the age of facial recognition systems, I really do not suggest
Yeah.
doing like
Yes.
this. Because
Yeah, but
Famed
that's
Swedish
why.
conference organizer caught jumping fare.
yes,
Okay.
good.
Yes.
Hey, Japan, if you can find that footage of me jumping the turnstile in,
Hacking, right? Hacking the
at Hiroshima
Jumping
Station
the bill 20 years later.
back in 1993, um, yeah,
The cold case mysteries. You have like a whole TV show on solving
but
cold cases.
it sounds crazy, but Japan is so efficient that bikes don't go missing in Japan. Like they are on top of shit over there. Like there's no
Mhm.
things aren't falling between the cracks. Like the police
Some
are
poor government minister is doing accounting for years. He's like, I don't understand it. It's like there's a single person that's not paying fare.
right,
What's going on here?
right.
Someone's only paying $1, and he stayed up for late nights, for weeks on end. He's like, I got to see my family. No, I must solve this mystery.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So as we've done the past few days, we circled through the laborious Will Smith slap, and I
Again.
actually have a little story worth sharing since we met last
Oh
time.
no.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
the producer of the Oscars did an interview, and the producer, who it makes no difference at all, he just happens to be black himself. I thought that was kind of cool. And he sits down with, I think it was NBC News, and tells his side of the story. And this hasn't been revealed yet, and this is super interesting. And it totally changed how I feel about Chris Rock specifically. So actually, it increased how I felt about Chris Rock. I should say it didn't really change it. The what happened change it. The police are there on site in case some crazy person does something crazy, and the police say, well, actually, let me go chronologically. Chris Rock steps off stage after the first award is given. And as he steps off stage, the producer of the show says, did he really hit you? Because he wasn't convinced that actually happened. He thought it might have been faked or staged, or that they were in on it together.
Like Janet Jackson style.
Right, precisely. And Chris says, no, yeah, I just got sucker punched by Muhammad Ali, basically. And
Ooh.
and so that's when he knew that it was real. And he said he felt sick to his stomach, and as I think many people might have. And then anyway, so then the police are there, and the police are like, okay, what do you want to do? This is battery. This is a very clear case of battery. Do you want us to go arrest him right now? We're happy to do it. Whatever, you just give us the word, whatever you want us to do. We are here to do whatever you want us to do. And they're looking at Chris and the producer, and more so Chris, because it's really Chris's call more so than the producer's, from the producer's perspective. And Chris says, no, 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 no. I don't want any of that. No, 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 no. Well, let's just de-escalate and get past this. And and then they said, okay, fine. Then the producer's producing the show, backstage with the headset on, and he gets word that the Academy, who's sort of the owners of the event, have decided somehow backstage in another part of the venue that they want Chris removed from the venue. And then he, as the producer, got earshot of that, and then interjected himself into that to let them know that that's not what Chris Rock wants. It's your show. You can do whatever you want. I'm just here to let you know that I happen to know something that you might want to know in the while you're making this decision. That might influence your decision, and apparently it did. Although that part is not totally clear, because the latest rumors is that they did approach Will and tell him to leave, and he refused to. And maybe it was during his refusal that they weren't very insistent, because they quickly learned that Chris Rock wasn't, didn't want that to go down that way or whatever. So that's the latest update. And the only thing that really changes for me is, holy shit, do I have even far more respect for Chris Rock than I even did previously. Because it's one thing to, act a certain way on stage and be professional and carry on the task of being the host. It's a whole other thing to be instantly magnanimous and not, seek any sense of, kind of instant retaliation or anything like that. Even legally, like the police were saying, like, this is a clear case of battery. Just, if you want us to go get him right now, or more, we will do that against his will. They would have arrested. You could have had a, knee on a neck scenario in the middle of the fucking Oscars. If Chris had said, yeah, go arrest that son of a bitch, they would have done so with pleasure, sir. Like, and if he would have, I'm just going in, I love going into worst case scenario fantasies on all topics, genetics, what have you, chemical weapons, anything, nuclear war, whatever. So in the worst case scenario here, I'm just imagining is they go to arrest him as a group of police officers. Heaven forbid it would be a whole bunch of white officers. That would really be worst case scenario. Because then we could have triggered a Black Lives Matter World War III right there. Anyway, if they would have arrested him against his will and it got confrontational, and I imagine it could have. I don't think that's such an incredibly far stretch, because he did refuse to leave politely, is the rumors. So if he had resisted arrest live at the Oscars, and boy, that could have turned into the biggest social. The slap could have been a relatively minor compared to police fixated on removing somebody who doesn't want to be removed. Because then it could have got very, very physical, very, very, because the police know the laws of arresting people generally, and what this gets really interesting, and for Americans, super hot topic, nuclear hot, because, and it has been for years, ever since the Rodney King beating, which is the police have particular protocols that they know they can follow, and then what the public deems acceptable is actually much, much less than what is technically legal. That's why you keep getting police officers being found not guilty when the public feels they should be. So you could have had that happen with Will Smith, and that could have turned into, holy shit, an Armageddon of social calamity and chaos, the likes of which we have never seen before. Because we've seen police in America acting in brutal ways in their kind of heavy-handedness of their arrests of particularly African American males. This is just festering in the minds of Americans in the recent years, and heaven forbid if that could ever happen with a celebrity at the Academy Awards. Holy shit, that would have been unfathomably. I can't even begin to imagine a more hotter scenario than that. And to think that, wow, this is why I go back to Chris Rock. If Chris Rock had said, go get that son of a bitch, there's a very decent likelihood that could have happened. If Will had been resisting arrest, which I believe he very likely could have. And they're not going to let him resist arrest. They're going to forcibly arrest him. That's why I'm saying, wow, we were not that far off from. And what saved the day is Chris Rock's cool head. And as I do, the only kind of award that we have to give out here on Tech News is our little clap here. So I'm giving Chris Rock a well-deserved clap for, de-escalating and being the bigger person that day, wearing the big boy pants. So,
are you really sure that he would prefer a clap? So the last time someone clapped at him,
it's not a slap; it's a clap. It's not a whole bunch of
yeah.
Okay, so now we turn things to Ukraine as we always do. And somebody in my DM sent me an article about what's going on in Ukraine. One article about Ukraine. It says that the mobile networks in Ukraine are being weaponized to target troops on both sides of the conflict. Ukrainian soldiers have described the dangers of using a mobile phone in the front line in the conflict with Russian-backed separatists in recent years, because if they will find your phone and they will send a drone and bomb your ass. That's what the article says. So the Russians are using cell phone signals to target bombs, dropping bombs via drones. So they're using that data through the GPS systems. And the Ukrainians are doing similar things as well, which makes more sense because it's their cellular network. They have easier access to it and whatnot. I saw some other interesting articles in the past 24 hours. Gosh, they will come to me. But I want to see if anyone else. Yeah.
Belgorod. Did you read that?
What
And
is?
it's the first Ukrainian airstrike on Russian territory.
Right. Well, ostensibly the first, maybe second. Yes, I did see that as well. That the Russians are peeved yet again that they believe that Ukraine has, had a bomb drop on their side of the border. How dare they?
But it's weird
And
because Russia made that very quickly. So, and how the helicopters went into their Russian territory as a mystery as well, because no fought back from
Now
the
that would,
Russians.
you know what? Now that would be very interesting, would it not? What would happen if Ukraine starts launching serious bombs, like the biggest bombs they have access to? Because God knows we have video of Russia seemingly using these, what are those air bombs called, Johan?
You mean Turkish?
No.
Turkish?
no. He's talking about these vacuum bombs.
Yes.
And actually, Ukraine have 200 of these rockets, but the launchers were sabotaged when they abandoned because they actually found full trucks of rockets, and they had the launchers, but they throw a hand grenade into the control of the launcher before disabandoning the vehicles with the launchers in, so they can't launch them, but they can probably drop them.
Right. My point is, if Ukraine started to
Thermobaric. Thermobaric,
thermobaric,
Tyler, is the word you were looking
there
for.
you go. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
Thank you. If Ukraine starts doing tit for tat on the aggression on Russia's side of the border, what could or would Russia then do in terms of the PR war? How would they communicate that, for lack of a better word, to Russians, if at all? Would they completely say, no, we're not being bombed at all? Ukraine's not bombing us, because it puts them in a very awkward position of having to explain why Ukraine is bombing them.
Well, I mean, that's not
Because
the
they're
only
getting
thing, Tyler.
liberated.
It's quite a catch-22 because on one hand they would be like, yeah, look at how bad the Ukrainians are, they're bombing us. But on the other hand, Russians would be like, yeah, but how the hell are they bombing us? Aren't we the greatest military power on earth and they can just
Right,
drop bombs on
right,
us? Where are our defenses? So
right.
it's, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, thank you for that one. Is there anyone else have a Ukraine related story?
I sent to you on the back channel a video of mine clearing on the road from
Yes.
Warsaw to Kiev.
Yes.
They called it curling. Then
Yes.
when we're talking about 12-kilo tank mines moved by foot. They actually just shovel them aside on the road. Imagine if one of them would had a mercury switch.
Okay. Well, there's an article from CNBC that came out 2 hours ago that says Russia needs to show success at home to justify war in Ukraine. And that's going to be hard to do when Russians find out that Russians are being bombed on their side of the border. That's why the one that did happen recently in the past 24 hours is so interesting. Are they going to even let Russians know that that happened? Other interesting ones. Where what did I see? Kremlin
Yeah.
says Ukraine strike on Russian fuel depot creates awkward backdrop for talks. So I guess that's what Ukraine targeted, was a fuel depot, which makes a lot of sense. Cheryl? Russia's also demanding Wikipedia take down information about Ukraine war. That's been going on for a while, though. Russia hand control of Chernobyl nuclear plant back to Ukraine, according to the IAEA. I guess it's the nuclear consortium. Ukraine strikes fuel depot in Russia's Belgorod, regional officials say. Georgia joins the sanctions imposed on Russia over the invasion of Ukraine. This was stated by Georgian president. That's interesting news because Georgia got the shit beat out of it by Russia not so long ago. And there's a whole bunch of Russians in Georgia at the moment who are fleeing Russia. It's a neighbor, a significant neighbor of Russia's, and a former Soviet state. And interesting to see that they're participating in. They seem to be, like Ukraine, very not so friendly with Russia these days. What else? The fuel depot is certainly the biggest one. Okay.
I just sent you on the back channel. The New York Times
Oh,
actually,
oh, oh,
no, the
oh,
Wall Street
oh,
Journal.
wait,
Sorry,
wait,
yeah.
wait. Hold it before I forget. Apparently, Ukraine is reporting that two of their generals were traitors. And specifically, one of them who was leading the Kherson front, which is why Kherson has been a shit show from the beginning and why it was the one that was most handily defeated by the Russians. And they're now stripping him of his general ranking and whatnot. So that was a wild one. They actually named the guy, publicly shaming him and everything else. That was kind of an interesting headline I saw since we met last time. You were saying, Johan? Sorry.
The thing is that some of you may know that I have a little hobby project where I'm actually mapping up the resources of the oligarchs and the other Russian elite. I just pasted to you and you know, on the back channel the Wall Street Journal article that was published today. The US sanctioned Russian oligarch but exempt his companies. And this is something that I did see a couple of weeks ago, that these embargoes and sanctions against the oligarchs were targeting them personally and their property, but they didn't actually put their companies into the light. And so what I started doing was I started mapping up all their assets in different companies, and holy smoke, they own everything around you. Seriously. And now actually the Wall Street Journal has a piece of this where they actually bring this forward. But yeah, we have taken his boat and we may take his flat, but he still have a massive amount of ownage in different companies. We have this other oligarch that owned a football team in the UK, for example. And so now the press actually going where I were already 2 weeks ago when I in my product started mapping these ones. Johan done.
Okay. Kazakhstan says it's going to respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine and will adhere to UN decisions on Crimea and Donbass and will not be a tool for Russia to circumvent sanctions of the US and EU, said the head of the presidential administration. So there's another kind of Russian asset state not willing to play so friendly, at least publicly, with Russia, from Kazakhstan.
And apparently, Putin's domestic approval rating reaches the highest level in 5 years. They just did a new polling.
Wild.
Crisis nationalism, is this called?
You said he now has the highest
In 5 years, yes.
Now, is this a result of people responding to what they perceive as some sort of heroic or whatever positive action, or as it could be both, is it a result of massive reductions in truth, should I call it, or let's just call it information, less bias flowing into the country because of the restrictions? What do we think?
How the hell would anyone go about doing an accurate poll on the sentiment of Vladimir Putin in Russia, knowing that people would fear for their lives? You would have to have an absurd degree of assured people who are giving their answers and even participating would have to be given an absolutely ironclad, foolproof assurance of their anonymity somehow. Otherwise, there's no way in hell you're going to get any kind of a.
As long as it's not 100%, somebody will probably say no, right? But I have a question because
I mean,
the
you're
local
risking
Russians
you're
people.
risking your life just by saying no. I'm not in favor of them. So how do you encourage people to even
Exactly.
participate in such a poll?
Hi, hi, Annika here. I may have a slight answer. I have a friend I spoke to Sunday. She's Russian. She's been living in Sweden for the past like 2.5, 3 years. From a sort of half Ukrainian family. And she was, when I asked her, what do you think and how are you feeling? And she was super uncomfortable, even though it was just me and her boyfriend present. So it's a very sort of dual feeling, I think. And with the massive state propaganda, we have to remember that, for instance, if you've seen the headlines about the soldiers with radiation sickness around Chernobyl who was sent home, apparently they had no idea even Chernobyl had happened. So I mean, we have to realize this is years and years and years and years of state propaganda, and and there's also a large sort of victim mindset that the rest of the world are unfair to Russia, treating Russia unfairly. So that's why they need to defend themselves, and also the entire official reason for this war in Ukraine is to get rid of the Nazis, which of course aren't there. But that's the message you have the population have been sent. And I mean, if we would be here in Europe or the US and got the message that yes, Biden or any European prime minister would go off and save poor folks from the Nazis, a lot of people do believe that because they only have, especially older people, only have the state media, and there they report that this is going great and Putin is the savior of the people, and the world is just unfair with all these sanctions. So I think that's the story, unfortunately. Thanks.
And this is Susie, and I'd love to add on to Annika's thoughts about the psychology and mentality of the Russian people. I had the good fortune to be there a couple of times when it's called the Soviet Union. And this is what's going on in Russia. It's no way something that we can compare to what we be going on in Europe or other places in the West, because we are used to a much more free flow of information. But Putin has been sitting in power since 1999, I think it was, and he has had a plan all along. And one of his tricks is to keep playing on that Russia is unfairly treated, as you say, Annika. But also, he does something that we have to consider, and that is, if each of you think of the country that you feel most affiliated to, either your mother country where you're born or where you live now, try and think of something that you are proud of, just for a second. So think of yourself as Russian today. What have you got to be proud of within the last 25 years? You don't have a booming technology sector. You don't have a thriving democracy. You don't have hope for the future. And as long as you don't have hope for the future and you don't have a pride of where you are, you're looking for somebody to install that. And Putin, he's coming out with the pictures that in the West are considered jokes, where he's the judo fighter, he's the man wrestling with bears, riding on horses with a bear top body. But he is imposing the identity in Russians that we are strong and we can be strong, and I'm your strong man, and I will be leading you to safety and a better future. And I think if we don't address that need for hope and for something to be proud of, we will not understand why in ratings Putin is probably rating close to as high as we see in those polls, even they are fabricated as well. But I think that there's a lot of truth to them as well. Susie from Denmark, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Susie. So, have we covered or exhausted Ukraine for today?
I can
Anybody?
just give a book tip, Annika here.
Great.
It's Fear of Freedom, which is by Eric Fromm. Escape from Freedom, sorry, from Eric Fromm. And he wrote this when he was fleeing Nazi Germany. So it's from 1941, and talks about the entire sort of Versailles peace and how the Germans felt very the same way that the Russians do right now, and why Nazism rose to be prominent, and this fear of both being free and the sort of how this entire psychology works. Years since I wrote it, but it's a fantastic book, so please go and have a look. I will paste it in the top. Thanks.
Sure. Alrighty. Are we ready to do the big tech stories for today? By the way, happy Friday, everybody. Where's May to wish us all a happy Friday? I think we're ready. I'm ready. If you're ready, let's go. Okay. So the top story today, Friday, April 1st. Oh boy, watch out for gag headlines. Here we go.
Yes.
So we take all of these with an additional grain of salt. The first one is that after the big announcement in January that the E3 conference, which that's the largest video game conference in the world in Los Angeles at the LA Convention Center. And so E3 was canceled back in January. I remember when we read that headline. The announcement today is that the parent company that behind E3 also is telling partners there will be no digital event equivalent either. So they're just completely taking the year off. And the second biggest story is that Meta, formerly known as Facebook, confirms a now fixed Facebook bug which led to a massive ranking failure that increased views of harmful content up to 30% over the past 6 months. Okay. The third biggest story is also back to video games, that a dozen, that's 12, a dozen current and former employees at a place called Undead Labs, which is the Xbox studio behind a game called State of Decay 3. So a dozen current former employees at Undead Labs describe sexism, mismanagement, and a toxic work culture. Staff say that Undead Labs' transition to Xbox Studio was hampered by toxic workplace conditions and lack of direction. So here we have yet another video game studio. A dozen people at a studio collectively raising the awareness that they thought the things were not going swimmingly there. What's going on in the video game space, y'all? We had Activision Blizzard was one of the bigger stories in recent months, and although they have we haven't heard their name in a minute now. It seems like they may have weathered that storm. They did sell to Microsoft, after all. Anywho, but now we've got the beginnings of potentially. This is precisely how the mega Activision Blizzard story got started. Was a handful of current and former employees complaining about sexism. That's how that whole drama started. And that, boy, did that snowball get some traction. The next one is that, according to researchers, an allegedly Russian Tide wiper malware called Acid Rain, which shares similarities with malware called VPN Filter, was behind the attack on Viasat in February, which that's the satellite, high-speed satellite broadband company Viasat. Acid Rain is the seventh wiper associated with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Okay, next up, Apple releases iOS 15.4.1 and Mac 12.3.1 to fix 2 0 days that may have been actively exploited. Apple has fixed 5 0 days in 2022. Holy smokies. Holy smokes. 5 0 days so far this year. That's a whole lot of holes in your phone that bad dudes are sticking their fingers in and sucking out everything in your device. 5 different 0 days. That means exploits that you have no awareness are occurring on your device.
On the positive side with Apple, Tyler, they recently snuck in their universal control that they talked about in their last keynote, which I was using to great effect a couple of days ago. It's wonderful. Sat there on the sofa with a laptop, using your iPad to the left of you as a second screen, keyboard and mouse operates the iPad, using a television in front of you as well, if you wish, with an Apple TV as a third screen, kind of surrounded by screens, all very, very simple. So on the positive side, they're releasing some good features. That came out just a few weeks ago.
Okay, so the big question here is, does this new iPhone operating system and Mac laptop operating system or iMac operating system, the Mac OS, do these operating system updates solve Pegasus is the big question. And so we need, well, actually, Johan will know that answer tomorrow, ostensibly. So if Johan, if you could give us an update, I imagine, oh, well, on Monday rather, we'll find out if these new updates stop Pegasus. I don't imagine they do. But boy, I didn't realize there was 5. I knew there was somewhere in that ballpark. I knew we were between 3 and I thought we were 3 or maybe 4. But 5 0 days? Jeez Louise.
5 out of 90 days, right? First quarter?
No. There are 5 different vulnerabilities, exploits in Apple's ecosystem. A 0 day is a technical term, which means that the vulnerability is happening without the user ever having really done anything or having any knowledge about it whatsoever. That you are just your device is utterly compromised without any kind of knowledge or action on your part. And there's, even if there was one 0 day exploit that bad people could get their hands on, they'll go to great lengths to get their hands on that. And the fact that there's 5 different ones available, that's very concerning. That's kind of like saying, I mean, metaphorically, your phone is supposed to have locks on all the doors so that bad guys can't get in your house while you're sleeping. That, just as a metaphor, this is like saying you have 5 different ways for bad people to get into your device without you even knowing. And
yeah, the term comes. Sorry, Tyler. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the term 0 day, if you want to connect it together, comes from the idea that on day 0, i.e. the day the software was released, it was already a known exploit. So effectively,
Right.
somebody must have known about the exploit just before release. So that's where the 0 day comes from. There's a vulnerability since day 0.
Right. Out of the box. Out of the box, the phone is compromised. So the next one, Microsoft renames Your Phone. It's Android phone linking app for Windows. Who cares? Next one. There are sources which are saying that the Biden administration considers changing a Trump-era policy, which let the Department of Defense and the Cyber Command authorize cyber operations without White House approval. The Biden administration is reviewing whether and how to change a Trump-era policy which gave unprecedented authority to the Department of Defense and the Cyber Command. Okay. The next one's from Politico. Apple is opposing bills targeting gay and transgender people in Iowa, Texas, Florida, and other states via lobbying, filing court briefs, and recruiting allies. Apple is quietly mobilizing its vast resources to lobby against anti-LGBTQ legislation proliferating across the country, particularly in Iowa, Texas, and Florida.
That's good
And
news.
yeah, but and for those who don't know, Apple's CEO Tim Cook is what's the he's gay. He's a gay. He's outwardly gay, and although he doesn't really flaunt it, I don't. I mean, it's he doesn't. He's not in the closet. He's not hiding it, but nor does he. Wave big rainbow flags about it over Apple campus. Although, in fairness, they do have a very large rainbow in the middle of the campus for the amphitheater, the stage where people perform there. Although it looks like a very cool decoration, anyways. Like it might not doesn't necessarily have to be any insinuation in that. So
Yeah, apparently that goes back to the original colors because Steve Jobs designed that while he was still alive, I think, and it goes
exactly right.
back to the original colors used in the Apple branding before they went all cool and black and white.
Great point, Ben. For those who don't remember, the original Apple computers and logos had the Apple itself was a rainbow instead of just a white or silver or black Apple's logo that we're used to seeing today. It used to be rainbow colored,
Yeah, and it
and
was exactly that rainbow in exactly that order that's in the campus now. So,
and by
so I
the
think
way,
it's dual purpose
yeah,
these days.
and the longtime Apple team members have an internal phrase that something along the lines of "they bleed in seven colors," meaning they, have this rainbow. There's obviously that metaphor goes even deeper into amongst Apple team members in interesting ways. Okay, so the next one is from Bloomberg that 3 European food delivery stocks, namely Delivery Hero, Just Eat, and Deliveroo, lost a combined $23.7 billion, more than half their market value in the first quarter. Yeah,
Ouch.
indeed. Well, particularly hurt by that was Mickey, the Volt, which is spelled with a W because it's Nordic, a Finnish delivery company called Wolt or Volt, WOLT, started by Mickey, who was kind of a colleague, or what's the word I'm looking for? A friendly competitor of mine. He also was the CEO of one of the other largest European tech conferences. And he did a fantastic job as CEO of Slush, by the way. I really feel it was under Mickey's time as CEO that Slush really went from, an incredibly cool, smaller conference to a powerhouse of a conference. So it's not a surprise that he would make a unicorn at all. To me, he was phenomenal as CEO of the conference, and so he did Wolt, and then he sold Wolt to who was it? Which company bought them? And they bought them literally days. It was an all stock purchase, just days before all of these companies started imploding. I will get it was to DoorDash. So DoorDash acquired Volt in November 9th. And DoorDash's stock at the time, it was an all stock acquisition, valued the acquisition at around $8 billion. Well, because it was all stock, today that $8 billion is worth about 3.5 or 3, if not 2.5. I mean, it was just holy shit did DoorDash's stock tumble since then. And so ostensibly that $8 billion acquisition is now in the neighborhood of 3-ish. So which of course they wouldn't have sold at a $3 billion valuation. So that's just how it was. Literally right after that November acquisition. I mean, weeks later, the stock, just like all stocks, it's not, the whole sector just started taking a serious steep decline, as we say. So the next big tech story is since the Ukraine invasion, an estimated 70,000 tech workers have left Russia, despite income taxes eliminated till 2024. Oh, is that Putin's plan to keep the high-paid tech workers based in Russia? Is they're waiving income taxes? Income tax have been eliminated till 2024, and they've relocated to Poland and Latvia and more, and Lithuania. Russia's tech workers are looking for safer and more secure professional pastures. Well, yeah, and they also work for companies who have to avoid sanctions, who cannot do business with Russia any longer, so they need to move out of Russia if they want to continue to work for really any decent company at this point.
It's also Tyler.
Yes,
This is Rob.
yeah,
It's also a great way not to tarnish all the people who are going, but it's a great way to send out or plant spies. Also,
sure. Well, in both directions, ostensibly, but
absolutely.
yeah, it says by one estimate, up to 70,000 computer specialists, spooked by a sudden frost in the business and political climate, have bolted the country since Russia invaded Ukraine 5 weeks ago. Many more are expected to follow. Those are some of your most, high earning. That's a lot. That in itself is, that's a lot of lost tax dollars and a lot of lost smart people making a lot of smart solutions. You know,
Very, very big brain drain, I think. But famously enough, Putin was once taped on television telling his citizens that they should pursue opportunities wherever they are, not to stay in Russia. They should go where they get paid the most. So I guess they're taking that advice to heart now.
this week, Putin reacted to the exodus of tech professionals by approving legislation to eliminate income taxes until 2024 for individuals who work in information technology companies. They're going to Poland or Baltic nations of Latvia and Lithuania. A larger contingent has fallen back on countries where Russians do not need visas, such as Armenia and Georgia and former Soviet republics in Central Asia. That would be like your Kazakhstans. In normal times, millions of less skilled laborers emigrate from those economically shaky countries to comparatively more prosperous Russia. And now that whole trend has reversed. When we heard about the war on February 24, we thought it was probably time to leave, but that we might wait and see. On February 25, we bought our tickets and left. There wasn't much thinking to do, says a 24-year-old freelance computer system analyst from Novosibirsk. And they chose Kyrgyzstan, where they have family ties. Like all Russian workers contacted for this story, this person asked to remain anonymous. Moscow was cracking down on dissent even before the invasion of Ukraine, and people living outside Russia still fear reprisals. Quote, as long as I can remember, there has always been fear around expressing one's own views in Russia. How did you guys get yourself into that predicament? Man. Anastasia said, adding that the war and the background noise of patriotism made the environment even more foreboding. I left one day before they began searching and interrogating people at the border. Ouch. Because she might have gotten some deep shit based on what she had been saying on her devices. Okay, so the next big story is Wall Street Journal says they have sources that the White House is split over the Kaspersky sanctions, which could spur Russian cyber attacks and make enforcement hard due to the company's large clientele. Some officials are said to fear that sanctioning Kaspersky Lab could increase risk of Russian cyber attack, because this is actually one of Russia's biggest tech companies. Honestly, it's a virus detector basically for Windows primarily, and so now they're debating whether or not they should add it to the sanction list or ban list. They will. New York Times is doing a look at a Twitter account called Depths of Wikipedia, a viral social media account on Twitter created by a 22-year-old that shares bizarre, amusing, and surprising Wikipedia snippets from the bowels of Wikipedia. So it's just a fun Twitter account that's sharing surprising stuff deep, deep, deep in the deeper underbelly of Wikipedia, deep down in that rabbit hole. Andy Jassy, the new Amazon CEO, earned a few dollars as his first year of Amazon CEO, just a paltry $212.7 million. And Amazon Web Services CEO earned $81 million. And the Amazon Consumer CEO earned $56 million. They're making some good coin over there in Amazon land. New York Times says the House Oversight Committee launches an investigation into Amazon's labor practices during severe weather events after a tornado killed 6 workers in Illinois. And I remember that day very vividly. And we had somebody on stage who lived less than a mile from that tragedy, where people were killed at that factory where the roof collapsed. Part of it blew off, part of it collapsed, killing some of the people in the factory. And so, of course, you have to investigate just how these warehouses are built, and if ostensibly the company could be responsible, especially when the previous headline is highlighting the fact that the CEO made over $200 million in the past year. I imagine for a very small fraction of that, you could have made a factory that where the ceiling might not have collapsed. Politico says they have sources that the UK government has quietly approved the sale of a Welsh semiconductor factory to a Dutch subsidiary of China's Wingtech. So a Chinese company with a Dutch subsidiary is purchasing a Welsh semiconductor factory. Okay. There's a little leak from the New York Times of how Facebook does content moderation. Facebook's training documents to their content moderators apparently is telling the moderators to err on the side of an adult when judging people's age in photos or videos, to avoid erroneously flagging child abuse systems. If you can't tell if the person is adult or a child, err on the side of assuming they are an adult so that you don't accidentally flag adults as children, and because then things get more complicated. And what else do we got? Apple Business Essentials launches for all small and medium businesses in the US, starting at $3 a month, similar to Google Workplaces. Texas starts requiring new large-scale cryptocurrency miners to seek permission to access the power grid, as our friend David Chang told me they were going to do when I met with him in Bangkok, when we were both hanging out in Bangkok a couple months ago, back in December, because he's involved with the Chinese miners in Texas, and he says, yeah, they're going to make it illegal, or you're going to have permission to tap into their power grid as miners. And now you're seeing the headline from Bloomberg today, months later. The next is Instagram rolls out updates to its DM system of sending direct messages. They now include 30-second song previews and the ability to reply while browsing, quick post resharing, and that's cool. Quick post resharing is very cool. And silent messages, that's very cool. The EU Parliament votes to outlaw anonymous crypto payments. Yep, they don't like that. Not one bit. And extending KYC rules to even the smallest transactions with unhosted or self-hosted wallets. So here comes, we're now getting into the deeper details of this brewing battle between governments and the geeks who make technologies to circumvent governments. Because governments don't like being circumvented. And Ben might have some thoughts on this, but this new vote from the EU Parliament to outlaw anonymous crypto payments of all sizes, regardless of how the wallets are hosted, this is going to turn into a very interesting battle. So they're going to essentially they're going to treat anonymous crypto transactions like heroin. This is, I think, the easiest way to explain it to non-geeks. People without any kind of technical understanding assume that governments are going to treat truly decentralized, uncustodied, what's the word I'm looking for? Non-custodial, truly decentralized apps like Mun Wallet or what have you. The governments are going to create penalties that are quite severe, like you're committing a very serious crime. I wonder if they would even go so far as to make it felonies, like very serious crimes. To be continued. We will find
Do
out.
you have a link? Do you have a link to the specifics really matter here, Tyler? I'm trying to refresh the room, but it's not pinned. Do we have a link to this? I'd like to read into it and try and give you some more.
I'll pin it right now. Here we go. There it goes.
Thank you.
So, in other words, it'd be kind of like when Roosevelt made gold illegal. There are people that had it and people that, feared getting caught. And then the question is, if you are in court and you raise your right hand, you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, but the whole truth, will you lie under oath is what it comes down to. And that's how this could be. Do you have do you have Bitcoin, for instance? I mean, that's kind of a scary scenario.
Well, this is where the zero-day exploits get very interesting, because governments can have ways into your devices to see that you do have a Bitcoin wallet and how much you have in it. As secure as you assume this, app is on your device, or the website you visit on a laptop, however you happen to do, assuming you're exchanging cryptos via some kind of app, they might be able to know that, and they don't give a shit if you're swearing under oath or not. They have strong evidence that links you to this very illegal activity that they've recently made illegal, or soon will anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So the
they're
key
always.
here is they're saying that it's anonymous, untraceable Bitcoin or crypto transactions. So that means ones where they didn't start. Once you see the on ramp or the off ramp at either stage, you can trace it. If you see somebody buy the cryptocurrency in the first place, you can then follow that through the blockchain. In most cases, not with all blockchains, and this will have an interesting impact on some blockchains like Monero that might make it impossible to determine whether somebody's transaction is traceable back to who they are or not. But with Bitcoin, certainly, and that's the one that I know about, if the government have seen you buy Bitcoin, they can then trace that Bitcoin through every transaction you make. It's very much a public ledger. The other place, even if they haven't seen you bought it, so you've had it since the early days, is that when you off ramp and sell it at a KYC, AML, know your customer, and anti-money laundering registered exchange, they can then backtrace everything you have done in the past. So they are the 2 points that you can be seen. It's like an invisible highway, but when you're the on and the off ramps have very much got lots of number plate cameras on them. So, so there's that point, and I think it's that they're outlawing. In the UK, for instance, they made Bitcoin ATMs illegal. But as a Bitcoiner seeing that, I'm thinking, well, why on earth do I want to use a Bitcoin ATM? I'm going to pay much higher fees, horrible fees, 17, 20%, something like that. Why would I want to use it? It sounds like you're trying to be shady and wanting to use it in the first place. So anyway, that's just a clarification.
And just a small observation, as Tyler was saying that, I think it triggered his voice assistant. So governments and these technologies kind of enable asymmetric advantages that perhaps sometimes we're not familiar with, that they can have the information that we have. And especially if a nation state type actor wants it, there's very little that the individual can do without additional resources.
Yeah, as far as governments buying 0 days, I don't believe. First of all, most of the people that use, most of the hackers that are out there that would find a 0 day are already using crypto. So they're not going to go publish where if they wanted to go to the bad side, they make a lot more. Like say $1 million for an exploit to a newbie sounds great, but using that exploit to walk off with $615 million makes you think that hacker is just child's play.
So now we go into the tweets that people are sharing. And the first one that I have is from, who's this one? Oh, we can skip that one. The first one is from Katarina.
Tyler, did you
Yeah.
cover the one that the spec behind the Truth Social is down like 31% of its original value, and the downloads of Truth Social is down 95%?
No, I
Yeah,
hadn't
it's
seen
in the. You just refresh your page, you'll see it on like a few, like another top 3.
it. That's the Trump's social media
Yep.
startup, which seems to not really be so as active as he probably had hoped.
But didn't they raise a lot of money? So it's sort of like a little Ponzi scheme in the end, right? Or I don't know, just weird.
It was a SPAC, right? And it was, publicly traded, and the price went quite high at one point.
SPACs are the new ICOs, so ultimately, yes, it is a Ponzi scheme. Not that Trump would be involved in anything like that, of course.
Yeah, but the
I
other
mean, we
scenario.
know how everybody makes a lot of money when they invest with Trump, right? Just joking.
I think Ken shared something on the back channel. I'm not sure whether he's free now to share regarding some new regulations on specs. Maybe he's busy today, so he's on stage. But
So I just found my first April Fool's headline here from Heyman. Someone is launching the Legverse, the first metaverse for legs, and it's obviously a clever pun or joke because people in the metaverse are notably missing legs in many apps in the metaverse. So the Legverse, and then this, yes,
Yeah,
Ken.
yeah. I was going to say that what Cheryl was referring to is I don't remember if I did it 24 hours ago or 48 hours ago. Somewhere I did tweet out something that the SEC is taking a fresh look at SPAC regulation
Yeah,
because okay, so that, I don't know if you wanted to cover that. It's
we
not,
did cover that
it's
very
up.
briefly. We did, like on Wednesday. That I
Oh,
remember.
that's what I thought. She brought it up again, so I forgot. I mean, I wasn't okay.
Um, a May found one which I can't tell if this is April Fool's or not. Citi, which is Citibank, the Citi Group. Citi sees metaverse economy as large as $13 trillion by 2030. That's got to be a joke. That's way too high. By 2030, that's only 8 years. 13 trillion. The virtual world could be the next generation of the internet, the bank's analysts said in a report. The total addressable market, or what we call a TAM, which is the market size, for the metaverse economy could be between 8 trillion and 13 trillion by 2030, up to 5 billion users, but getting to that market level is going to require sizable infrastructure investment. Citi said, okay, yeah, now with all that context, yes, I understand this is not a April Fool's joke. Yeah, conceivably, if everything goes swimmingly all in the right direction with no unintended adversities, then yeah, plausibly you could get to something that high. Um,
Also, if you count in all of the coin that's being created in each of those metaverse.
well, I think the most useful data point would be how big is internet economy today, and then what percentage is do we expect to switch over to the metaverse? Would be the simplest way to do this sort of napkin math. Anywho, so the next one is from who's this one? Arun shares one that U.S. listed Chinese stocks audit dispute. China regulator tells auditors to consider preparing for inspections. China has sent another signal of progress towards resolving an audit dispute that's threatened U.S. listed Chinese companies with delisting. And there's just no love between the U.S. and China. The ever escalation of these kinds of issues. The Chinese Securities Regulator Commission said in a statement to CNBC today, Friday, that it convened this week a meeting with some accounting firms and told them to consider preparing for joint inspections. Chinese and U.S. regulators' consultations on audit supervision and cooperation are overall going well, the Commission said. Since March, the SEC has started to name specific U.S.-listed Chinese stocks for failing to adhere to the what's called the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act. So China has sent another signal of progress towards resolving an audit dispute that is threatening to so they want to make sure that these companies don't get delisted, essentially. But America wants them to delist. So we will find out what happens in that continuing drama. So thank you, Arun, for that one. Katerina found one from Neuroscience News. The headline reads, "The relationship between psychedelics and the consciousness. When beliefs change following psychedelic use in relation to mystical experiences, attributions of consciousness tend to increase." This is from Johns Hopkins Medicine. Psychedelic drugs like psilocybin, an ingredient found in so-called magic mushrooms, have shown promise in treating a range of addictions and mental health disorders. Yet there's something mysterious about almost mystical about their effects, and they are commonly believed to provide unique insights into the nature of consciousness. Now, a new study by Johns Hopkins Medicine researchers addresses the question of whether psychedelics might change the attribution of consciousness to a range of living and non-living things. Say what? Addresses the question of whether psychedelics might change the attribution of consciousness to a range of living and non-living things. The findings reveal that higher ratings of mystical type experiences, which often include a sense that everything is alive, were associated with greater increases in attribution of consciousness. Oh, I see. Here we go. Quote, this study demonstrates that when beliefs change following a psychedelic experience, attributions of consciousness to various entities tend to increase. It's not clear why, whether that might be an innate drug effect, cultural factors, or whether psychedelics might somehow expose innate cognitive biases that attribute features of the mind to the world. For the study, researchers analyzed data gathered between August 2020 and January 2021 on 1,606 people who had a belief-changing psychedelic experience. Participants averaged 35 years of age, predominantly white and male from the U.S. Study participants completed an internet survey that included questions focusing on belief changes attributed to a single psychedelic experience with a classic psychedelic substance like psilocybin mushrooms. The survey also included questions about demographics, and etc. The study found that among people who had a single psychedelic experience that altered their beliefs in some way, there was a large increase in attribution of consciousness to a range of animate and inanimate things. For example, from before the experience, attribution of consciousness to insects grew from 33 to 57%, to fungi from 21 to 57%, from plants from 26 to 61%, and inanimate objects from 8 to 26%. So what this means is, and I experienced this myself personally in my own psychedelic experience, I came to understand that plants are very much alive, that they are animate objects, not inanimate objects. And if you investigate that even without being on psychedelics, you'll come to the same sensible conclusions. And if you doubt that, I have videos to show you, time-lapse videos of bean sprouts acting like animals. Plants move very slowly, but under time-lapse footage, you will sense that they actually behave incredibly like animals when sped up. So
So,
anyways,
Tyler, does that mean vegetarians really aren't that humane?
well, the
Just kidding.
question is, yeah, are the plants,
That's a great question.
yeah,
And I
suffering?
think attributions of consciousness to Putin decreased in that study.
Oh, yeah.
Why I oughta.
And
Okay,
why are you so surprised that
April
plants
Fool.
are alive?
no, but here, what's interesting is, why does taking psilocybin have such tremendous particular result in this way? Why is this such a common side effect of psilocybin, that people believe after taking psilocybin that fungi are animate and plants are animate, and very specifically, those have the two biggest increases, because other inanimate or man-made objects don't really get the same sort of huge spike that you see like fungi and plants do. And the answer is because people who take psilocybin talk with fucking plants. That's the answer.
Well,
Tyler, can
actually,
you put the link
Tyler,
up,
I think
please?
there's I think a little bit of an avenue of investigation is in what you said earlier. You made the very sensible observation that plants, trees, let's take trees. Clearly, firstly, let's go back one level. I believe that pretty much everything is conscious, just to a varying degree. Even a table has some memory of how it's behaved in the past. It was a tree at some point. A tree is clearly conscious to a lower level. If you see consciousness as a sliding scale, then one of the things that allows you to see a tree as conscious is to let go of your sense of time to some extent. And as you say, look at it over a 100-year time lapse, and you'll still soon see how damn conscious it is to its environment and the other trees around it and everything else. So perhaps an avenue in investigation would be that the idea is that psilocybin does something to your perception or hold on time. Anyway, just a thought for an avenue
Yes.
to investigate.
Okay. It's
A
an
related
Isn't it?
answer
hold on,
is
hold
that
on,
we are
hold
just
on,
survival
hold on.
machines, right? That's what we are.
Pauline,
And to survive, you have to warp your
Pauline,
perceptions to
hold on,
exaggerate the
Hold
sense
on,
that
hold
what is
on.
inside.
Leona,
Pauline.
we can't hear you. Hold on.
I'm going to come back to you, Pauline. I just want to directly retort to Ben's point, which is a fine point, but it's far more simple than that. The reason that people on psilocybin report on the survey that they now believe that plants are have consciousness is because the plants tell you through some bizarre form of telepathy that they are conscious, and they talk to you and tell you. I will tell you precisely. It rings in my head to this day what they told me. I was about 20 years old at the time, but they very specifically told me through some bizarre form of telepathy, and I had no idea that this was in the realm of possibilities that was going to occur on psilocybin. I thought my expectations going into this was I was going to see unicorns and bright colors and shooting stars and just silly shit like Grateful Dead posters. That's what I was expecting going into this.
What did they
So
tell you?
Tyler,
what
with
in fact,
that,
did
hold
they
on,
say bite me?
no, what they said was, and again, I want to reiterate, I had zero expectation that this was in the realm of possible outcomes. This was not at all in the realm of possible outcomes that I was aware of going into this. So this really caught me by surprise, by tremendous surprise. as if UFOs were landing in front of me. That's how big of a surprise this was. And the plants told me collectively, I call it Mother Nature or Gaia, as Dave does, or whatever you want to call it. They addressed me very specifically as Tyler and said, "You are very young," meaning you humans. "And we are very old, and we've been here a very long time. And we watched you come on the scene, evolve. We watched you evolve, and we see you, and you think that we are not paying attention. We are paying attention. And in fact, and this was the essence, the thrust of its message. It says, and again, this was even doubly not in the realm of possibility. The fact that it would impart some sort of wisdom was really out of the realm of possibility. I really wasn't expecting that. It said the same thing that causes you to grow and to age and to die is the same thing in us that causes us to grow and to age and to die. And I wasn't aware of that at the time when I was 20 years old. I did not know anything about that. I was so shook by this experience that I spent years kind of learning as much as I can about this whole phenomena. Turns out plants are based on DNA and RNA, just like humans. And they do germinate and grow, and their kind of how they populate is not so different than how human egg and seed populate and grow to a certain size and then start aging and eventually die, as all plants do, just like humans. That the process is actually very similar. The realization of that years later, and it literally was years later that I came to realize just on the kind of ground truth of the science of it, just how correct they were. I could myself personally could not have had that wise. That was not in my inventory of thought possibilities at that age.
I wonder if Tyler, if that was one of the reasons that without realizing you went and, moved to where you are now, kind of connecting to nature and kind of
Oh, there's no question
living your
about it.
lifestyle.
Oh, there's no question about it. I have the utmost respect for all plants at all times around me. I'm very aware that they are conscious at all times, and um, and I strive to tap into that telepathic portal in whatever part of my brain that was opened while on psilocybin. And I think more specifically, what happens is that animals also have that ability to talk to plants, probably even better than humans do, because it's not something that we really need. For them it's a much more utilitarian daily thing for them and primary to their existence. Where for us, it's no longer. Perhaps earlier in our evolution, it was a more primary function to be able to conversate with nature, but it no longer is. So we rarely do. However, that potential ability, which I would argue animals probably have, and we probably in some very old sense did too, as we used to have tails and now we don't, for example, that uh, the phenomena of psilocybin, it is very observably true. Anyone who's ever taken psilocybin will confirm for you very simply that your senses are greatly amplified. Your sense of smell, your sense of taste, your sense of hearing, your sense of touch are all very greatly amplified to an annoying degree, where somebody crinkling plastic wrappers can become wildly annoying. And your hearing and your sight and your smelling. And if you take, if you try to eat candy while you're on mushrooms, it's almost overwhelmingly flavorful. It's almost annoying, and smells are very, etc. So it also makes sense that if we have other senses that generally are too small to measure, like the ability to conversate with nature, but if that also is amplified as a result of taking mushrooms, then perhaps it's amplified to a degree where it actually becomes useful. And that's why I was able to conversate with nature momentarily. That's my current theory on the subject. But I think
Can
There
I
that's
was
what.
can
one
I
comment on
share?
Tyler.
I
You
agree with that,
Well,
but
hang
I
on.
think if you
Let me
put the lens on.
last thought. Hold on. Last thought. Because if my theory is true, as that's what's happening, then that would help explain why so many people, as a result of psilocybin, come to understand that plants are conscious, because they start talking with plants as an incredibly common occurrence. And consequence of taking psilocybin. And this would help explain why it's so common. So we have to pick who wants to go next. So flash your mic.
Leanne. I think
Hold on.
Leanne
Yeah,
wanted to speak for
Okay,
quite a while.
but before Leanne, I interrupted Pauline, so we're going to
Oh,
go
no, that's not
Pauline.
Pauline. That's Leanne.
It was Pauline,
Yep.
so we're going to
But
go
No, it
Pauline.
was Leanne. And then
Okay,
it
then we'll
was
go
Leanne. Yeah.
Leanne. My apologies, and then Pauline, and then Annette, and then we'll figure it out from there. So go ahead, Leanne.
Okay, yeah, great topic. I think complementary to that, we're just wired up to be survival machines. And so to exaggerate the consciousness of everything that is interior to us and de-emphasize the consciousness of everything exterior to us. Like if you imagine a sphere and light trapped within that sphere. So the light is just bouncing around and round and round inside and it can't get out, right? And that's like our consciousness inside our mind. It's wired to exaggerate that so that we will continue to protect the little organism that is our body, our soma, our self, and at the expense of the world out there. But in fact, that's a distortion. In fact, I agree with who was it that said, I can't remember, but that said that everything is conscious. I'm a panpsychist, but whether or not you believe that, once you enter that state where you're not functioning quite as well as a survival machine because you're allowing some of the consciousness to sort of wean its way inside, then you are going to be more aware of the reality that other things are conscious. So I think that's complementary to what you said, but it sort of rounds it out a little bit more.
Uh, this has been something that I've been experimenting for some time, actually, and I've done a little bit of my own research in the sense where, if you look at some of the information about them doing MRI scans on the brain, and it's been compared to what they call the happiest person, though it was a Tibetan monk, the state of meditation, and I almost feel like it's putting your brain in a state to be able to pick up more sensory, like vibration, if you want to call it that. I believe it, like a personal theory that they say that people with autism a lot of times like they get overstimulated. That's why they're unable. It's like you said, like a tiny crinkle piece of paper is just so much that all the stimulation crashing together that I think on a survival basis, imagine going out in the forest and hunting and everything is just vibrating. You're like, oh my god, I can't even focus and catch one thing, right? So I think it's a little bit of that, which is a little sad because as much as we think it's evolution, I almost think it's partially a de-evolution as well. And I don't know if I should be sharing this, but I convinced my dad to try it, and he's like a super traditional Chinese man hasn't done anything else before but has meditated for over 30 years every morning. And yeah, it was really interesting. Like when he had the experience, he said, oh, I just feel like every cell in my body is vibrating at a super high frequency. So that's my 2 cents on that to share.
That's beautiful.
Tyler, one quick.
So Tyler, I'm sure you're
Yeah, and then Ben,
if
go
you don't
ahead.
mind. Yeah, I'm sure you're familiar with the mycorrhizal network that exists underground that is actually fungus that connects all tree roots, and it's believed that they actually speak to each other through those networks.
Mycelium, yes.
Yeah, through the mycelium, exactly. And then there's also obviously the ape theory that an ape ate the mushroom,
Songbird.
and that's what
Yeah,
evolved humans into their consciousness. So
that would
my
be
my question more. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Terence McKenna's stoned ape theory. Of course, I'm very intimately
Yeah.
familiar. Yeah.
Exactly. So I just wanted to bring up those 2 points because it could be that the fungus actually can continue to talk with plants even while it's ingested, that there's
Yes.
additional connection
Correct.
through those
Well,
networks.
by the way, now you're opening a Pandora's box here, which is that theory goes on to pontificate that the spores of the psilocybin mushrooms have can travel intergalactically,
Yes, yep, that was going to be my
and that
next point.
they are designed for that, and that the DNA of psilocybin is quite interesting itself when analyzed, and that if you were an alien from another planet and you wanted to conversate with people on another planet, we do this as well. We send up, satellites with CDs and all kinds of weird hieroglyphs in our attempts to try and conversate with aliens. Well, it's plausible that aliens might be trying to conversate with us in very strange ways because they're aliens in ways that are not so obvious to us. And one of those ways might be they send a sort of living organism in the form of a spore that can travel across asteroid belts, and when it arrives, goes into the ground, grows, and turns into something that you eat. That's kind of genius when you think of it, actually. And that when you eat this, it transformed your own consciousness. Now, this would be truly high level technology type shit. I mean, this is like superior to human technology at this point.
That's
So,
biotech, right?
right, we're talking like very high level biotech, essentially. And that, by the way, this theory gets really fucking crazy when you realize that when you do very high levels of psilocybin, you do start talking with fucking aliens in your head. So, when you get over 5 grams, essentially. So,
A heroic dose, right?
yeah, heroic dose, as our friend Terrence would refer to it. So it's wild shit. Ben, you were saying?
I was just going to say, so when I said that maybe an avenue of exploration would be to look at how substances like this change our perception of time, and you came back and said, well, it's simpler than that. I would argue I'm fascinated by, largely agree with, and super excited by nearly everything that was said in between, including the mycelial network in trees is amazing. It's like a packet switching network that we've now spent millennia redeveloping, called the internet, and so on and so forth. All amazing. And your theory about fungus is traveling across the universe is awesome as well. The one thing I would say is it's not simpler. All of what you've just laid out is not simpler than the simple idea that psilocybin has changed your perception, which led to the experiences you had.
Right.
We always want to go with the simplest first and then build on it. So some of what we talked about is not simple. The mycelial network is not simple and well understood. This idea that spores could travel across space is not completely infeasible. It would still have to obey the basic laws of relativity and the amount of time and many millennia that would take. But aliens have got plenty of time. They're probably patient things. So pretty cool conversation, but just it isn't simpler. That would be my retort.
Right. But wouldn't that be a genius approach? That if we assume we want to communicate with intelligent life on other planets, then we have to assume that the environment is suitable for life, and we kind of have an idea where life is suitable, right? In terms of temperature and whatnot. Well, it
But it's
turns
not
out,
just that, Tyler. Mushrooms can actually change environments.
sure. But
Yeah.
my point is, why not communicate? Why not create the agent of communication would embed itself in the ground and grow and be consumed and self-replicate on that planet. So it would only, of course, self-replicate on planets that are suitable for life. It's in that sense, it's kind of genius. Yeah. Well, if it's not an environment suitable for life, the spores won't replicate. If it is, it will, and it will self-replicate until it gets consumed, and then whoever's there will consume it. And strangely, as Annette implicated very passingly, that if the life on that planet are not yet intelligent, this thing that they're consuming might actually help them to evolve to become more intelligent. That's in essence partly what these fucking mushrooms do, according to the Stone Ape theory, that because of your heightened senses of sight and hearing and whatever, over time, that expands the cranial capacity, the neuroplasticity, and everything in that whatever is there at that time. So again, maybe this is some incredibly genius, higher intelligence um, vehicle of helping humans evolve on planet Earth as a result of psilocybin. The ideas that apes consumed psilocybin mushrooms, and that kind of expedited the brain development changes between primates, apes, and ourselves, chimpanzees most notably. But anyway, the
I just
Katerina,
so without the
one second, Katerina. I just want to read in this article that you shared, and thank you for sharing it, that there's one more, what I feel might be the most important line in this article, is that it says, quote, on average, the participants, and again, there was more than 1,600 of them, indicated the belief-changing experience in question occurred 8 years prior to taking the survey on average. So, the researchers surmise, these belief changes may be long-lasting. And that's a profound observation, because that at least implies that these belief changes are very resilient and very strong and are not flippant, that these are very strongly held beliefs that these people have. As you can tell from the tone of my voice, that my belief that I had a somewhat supernatural like experience, for lack of a better word, um, is very strongly held because it was incredibly real. It was incredibly real. It felt real, more real than real, and that's a very common observation by people on high doses of psilocybin as well. Go ahead, Katerina.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that without fungi, the plants wouldn't be able to get nutrients out of the ground, and also phosphate and water. And then on the other hand, the plants supply then the fungi with carbohydrates, so from photosynthesis. So without that interaction, there would be really no plants for us, and no basically oxygen and food, and turning basically sunlight into energy that we can use, if it's in form of eating, or coal or oil for for our energy production and whatever we do. So that's something I wanted to add. The interesting analogy is that basically fungi interconnect, let's say, a forest, and without it, it wouldn't be possible to have forests and stuff like that. And then on the other hand, what taking these compounds does in the brain is to make connections that usually we don't make in the brain. So basically, all kinds of brain regions that wouldn't really talk efficiently to each other or a lot to each other start all of the sudden talk to each other, and you have this very broad spread connectome that starts being very active, which is kind of an interesting reflection of how the fungi work in the ground and with the plants. I think that's a very interesting part. And the other thing I wanted to add, there was this lab in Australia that published a bunch of Nature publications that showed that plants can have conditioned memory, which is really interesting. Not just memory, but conditioned memory. So what they did, I don't know, maybe I shared it before, but it was to, like the bell with the dog. I don't know if anyone knows
Yeah,
the Pavlovian
yeah,
conditioning.
of course.
You can do the same with plants, which is really interesting because it's another form of memory that is. So you can do the same with plants, just with wind. So you blow from where the light, like the light is the food source, you blow constantly for 2 weeks at the same time of the day. When you add the sunlight from a specific direction, you add the wind blowing. What the plants do, they turn towards that direction every time the food source comes. And then after 10 days, you can just take the food source away, so the light, and just add the wind, and the plants will turn that direction. So they showed, and then they did a lot of other experiments to show that plants have a conditioned memory. So that's another very interesting point I wanted to make.
Right. Well,
Fantastic Fungi on Netflix. Highly recommended.
there's there's also, just for people to get their heads around the simple fact that plants are conscious, there's a spectrum of life, from plants to animals, and starfish and other, namely kind of sea creatures. There's
Anemone.
plenty. I'm sorry, anemones.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of things that fill in the gaps between plants and animals that act like a kind of biological bridge between them. It's not a binary thing where you have what appears to be. Yes, I think starfish might be the most interesting example. Is a starfish a really smart plant that is able to figure out a way to move around essentially? Or
Hence, the sliding scale makes life so much easier when discussing consciousness, in my opinion.
right?
Just see it as a sliding scale. It makes it really easy. I did have one other comment, but I don't want to stop you mid-sentence, so I'll shut up for a second.
No, go ahead.
So I was going to say that the general class of hypotheses you're talking about is called panspermia. So I tweeted it. I know that sounds like something sexual, but it's not. It's the idea that the life on Earth was seeded from off of Earth, and there's a whole class of, there's a whole load of theories like that. So this idea with fungus is another fascinating possibility in that within that class. The other thing to point out is that it's a hypothesis, not a theory. I think this room's mature enough and smart enough to know the difference. If you've ever read or created a theory, you'll realize how hard it is to actually come up with a theory. A theory is not something, in colloquial terms, it's just, I've got this idea. But in scientific terms, a theory is actually something that's very difficult to get to. You have to come up with a complete and very precise framework of statements, normally mathematically formulated. So yes, it's a hypothesis. It's weaker than a theory. There's no evidence to turn it into a theory, or not a strong enough framework. But it's cool and it's amazing, and it's really mind opening to think about fungus as another one of the possible panspermia theories. So anyway, just tweeted it if anyone wants any further reading.
I
And
think
if I may,
the bigger question there is it a theory because it hasn't been studied is it a hypothesis because it hasn't been studied long enough and proven to be a theory? It's only recently being reopened as a something that you can study. It was shut down, I think, in the 1960s, if I'm not mistaken.
Go ahead, Eric.
No, valid.
uh, and just as a side note, there was a recent author who joined Katarina's club as a guest speaker, Angus Fletcher. He actually has a book, and I'll pull up the title here in a moment. It was about um, the idea of having a set of techniques to become more creative that he developed for the military, Angus Fletcher. And one of them involved seeing the object as unique, or trying to see the world through that object, even if it was inanimate. And so that kind of seems to suggest that creativity somewhat depends on your ability to change your perspective. And if you can have this kind of asynchronous firing in the brain where regions that normally don't communicate are able to communicate, you might be able to develop some new insights. And specifically for something like mitochondria and plants, last year there was a kind of an amazing paper that came out that showed that mitochondria have social lives, that they share resources, they work together, and that may be one of many channels that we may or may not be aware of when we're around other living beings and organisms. That, for example, our internal gut microbiome is in some extents another sensory organ, because as many of us know, you can have an upset stomach and there not really be much at work, or your mood can change quite suddenly. So we are often co-opted by many of these other factors that we kind of take for granted, or don't even realize that they affect our lives. So just a few comments there. And indeed, psychedelic experiences are magical. I'd recommend it to everyone. So
I like the idea also that the psilocybin, and by the way, I mean, because the people, humans are still just learning strangely in 2022. We still haven't unraveled the mystery of our own biome, but we're starting to understand its importance. And it's conceivable that psilocybin plays a significant role in that in ways that will still take us a very long time to figure out. But that only makes the whole mystery all that more interesting. So, going back to tech headlines, the Elizabeth Warren calls for U.S. to create a central bank digital currency. According to CoinDesk, quote, "I think it's time for us to move in that direction," the Democratic senator told NBC's Chuck Todd in an interview.
Doesn't like a regulation she doesn't like, or she loves a regulation.
Well, let's see what kind of move she makes, or her husband makes, and then we can all follow that insider trading tip. The next one is from Pat, that Japan needs more babies, according to Bloomberg. So it's helping its citizens to cover the high cost of fertility treatments, but experts say that won't be enough to solve its problem. Indeed, you're going to need to come up with some very creative solutions to reverse the declining birth rate in Japan. That it is hyper decretion over there in Japan, and they're going to run out of people in the not so distant future.
AI and technology is definitely not helping them in that avenue.
And here comes VR and VR porn to save the day, which will completely end the birth rate as we know it. There will no longer be babies born in Japan
Robots.
after next year.
Although, well, the Japanese might do what the Chinese are doing, which is, hey, we're going to have a bunch of synthetic wombs, robotic nannies. It'll be fine. It'll be like that last Star Wars movie where you just see this entire organization of cloned people. It'll be fine. Nothing to be too concerned about.
Well, perhaps
And
not coincidence then.
aging. So if we fix aging, we will be glad if not so many people, new people come up,
That's a great
basically.
point. And
Exactly.
we did read a headline about 2 weeks ago, one of the best we've ever encountered, of an MIT lab who is an understudy of David Sinclair from Harvard's aging lab, who claims to have found a way to reverse aging in mice without increasing the risk of cancer. That's the hard part. They previously have figured out ways to reverse aging. You know, it's kind of a visual estimate of aging, anyways, um, in mice, but they would usually form cancers. And now the big revelation was they figured out a way to do it without increasing the risk of cancer.
Yeah,
So,
some of the information from the genome was inaccessible because molecules bind together, therefore making that part of the genome inaccessible. And they found a molecule that allows that to open up again, and so therefore restoring some of the functionality and vitality of the cells. It was quite amazing that such a molecule could even be constructed and discovered. So
but it might not
And we
be
have
a coincidence,
something new.
Katerina. Katerina, 1 second. That the next article from CNET from BB says that the human genome has finally been sequenced. While 92% of the human genome was sequenced in 2003, that would be by Craig Ventner at Genentech, scientists have struggled to map the remaining 8% until now. That's By the way, we've seen headlines like this multiple times over the years. It's just further and further and further, um, um, deeper and deeper levels of gene sequencing. And I guess they're in this one. Are they claiming every single pair? Perhaps almost 100 scientists from the Telomere to Telomere Consortium. Yep, it's right there in the name. Collaborated on a project to map the entire genome. The additional 8% that was sequenced accounts for 400 million new letters added to the existing sequenced DNA, enough for an entire chromosome. Yeah, which are all based on chromosome pairs. The additional genes are very important for adaptation, according to one of the major contributors to the main paper on the research and a professor of genome science at the University of Washington in Seattle. They include immune response genes enabling humans to adapt and survive infections, plagues, and viruses. Well, that would have come in handy. As well as genes that enable human brains to grow larger than those of other primates. Oh, shit. Wow, what a weird coincidence. We were just talking about that. How is it that human brains grew to be bigger than our biological ancestors of primates? And now they've found the genes related to that. Quote, I've always
ancient first say yes.
Tyler,
Hold on, Annette. We got to go back to Katerina first. Quote, I've always come back to the point that to understand genetic variation comprehensively, we need to have a reference that's complete. Makes sense. 95% of the puzzle being solved is good enough for some people, but I guess for me, getting that last 5% was so important because I believe so much of what we don't understand about disease or we don't understand about evolution is disproportionately represented in that 5% of the genome that we didn't sequence kind of the first go round. Very cool. We
In the
finished it.
prior
Hold on, Annette. I cut off Katerina, and then we'll go to you. Go ahead, Katerina.
yeah, so it's really interesting. This led us to have some discoveries about the uniqueness of the human genome and then also uniqueness of different disorders like Parkinson. And then the other thing that's really important that has been a big breakthrough is to modify the epigenome. So it's basically the manual how to use the genome. There has been like recently a lot of breakthrough because that's important for rejuvenation and going back to basically the blueprint of our cells, to reset that, and so we can go back in time basically in our cells. So there's been a lot of new studies, and yeah, I had a bunch of guest speakers if you want to check it out, and we'll have more coming up. But yeah, that's very impressive and will lead us to like a lot of breakthroughs and printing organs, because in order to print organs you need to know how to grow them in a way that they won't get cancer. So all of these new breakthroughs are very exciting this year, and will lead us to a lot of ways to maybe not age anymore.
Okay, Annette.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
I was just going to mention there in the article, the prior article that you read, it had mentioned something about giving consciousness to living and non-living beings. Was that an accurate line?
Say it again, please.
I said in the prior article, I believe you read a line that said something about the study showing it giving consciousness to living and non-living beings.
Yes.
Oh, so it just kind of goes together with the idea of growing and expanding consciousness and brains. I don't remember the exact line that.
Okay, so the next article that I have is kind of related. I think BB sent this one in from The Verge, that genetic sequencing opens new doors and concerns for home health testing. Let's Get Checked acquired Veritas, a genetic testing company. At-home health testing company Let's Get Checked has acquired the genetic testing company Veritas Genetics. It announced Tuesday on the 31st, so yeah, just a couple days ago. It's the latest pivot and partnering with an industry like home testing. Let's Get Checked is one of the largest companies under that umbrella, and the company said the revenue is growing, blah, 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 blah. And basically, they're doing these $600 genetic tests which sequence your entire genome, not parts of it, because 23andMe and Ancestry and all of the kind of consumer ones like the $99, $200 tests are not doing the full genome. Unlike companies like 23andMe, Veritas sequences customers' entire genome, making it more expensive. The others only sequence chunks of DNA linked to information about relevant health conditions or ancestry information. Veritas suspended operating in the United States, but now they've been acquired, and it looks like they're going to re-productize this.
That's really interesting. So 23andMe technically is an SNP, single nucleotide polymorphism mutations, which are only very slight differences. But to do a whole exome sequence kind of gives you every little single detail. And having had done both, I did sequencing with 23andMe and Craig Venter's Human Longevity. There were some differences, but not that much, in my opinion. But it was on the order of $5,000 about 4 years ago. So to see the price drop to something like $600, that's really exciting. And the joke, at least according to Craig Venter, is this technology decreases in price a little bit faster than Moore's law, and he jokingly calls it Venter's law. So
Okay, so what's interesting about this article is this really interesting debate point that it raises. It says that doing these high fidelity genetic tests could also be a potential conflict of interest. Quote, the vast majority of the genome is like a weather report. Just like a weather report might tell someone it could start raining in their area, it's not a guarantee that it actually will. Genes can say if someone is more or less likely to have a certain health condition, but without a high degree of certainty in most cases. If the company giving out the information also sells diagnostic tests and treatments for the same condition, it could be a conflict of interest, especially if they're pushing people toward those options based on more uncertain genetic information. So it's like your news source selling you umbrellas, essentially, or lightning insurance. That
Yeah,
they're
I
the ones.
think I think
I think
John
that
talked about this last time, how the Bayesian model does allow these problems to emerge. Like, hey, I have a chance of dying from this childhood disease, but I'm an adult. How should I properly interpret this data? So it takes some nuance, and specifically for people like myself who knew that they had cancer, it helped me map out kind of the treatment pathway or the path forward a little bit better. But for a lot of people, the concern is that it'll create panic, and that kind of panic may lead to unnecessary procedures. And I absolutely agree with John Madison on that one.
There's another
but
potential
can I
major outcome of all of this. One second,
can
Katerina, which is, hold on, that due to this new layer of fidelity that we're getting around our genetics and health and the consequences, I think we're going to, the next big shoe to drop is we're going to realize just how toxic high levels of sugar consumption is. And just like this big tobacco was sued, I think we're going to see the corn syrup industry, or perhaps Coca-Cola and McDonald's, are going to, they they better be very careful with their email exchanges that they have around studies and reports that they have access to around connecting high level of carbohydrate consumption with um, kind of fatal heart condition, heart disease, obesity, diabetes, all of these things. There's no doubt they are seeing very clear correlations of these things, which people are going to, once they understand in greater fidelity just how directly the Sunday, the caramel sundaes they were buying, or having the Starbucks frappuccinos that they're wolfing down every day. And Starbucks knew that this frappuccino that I came in and I bought this thing every day, and they sold it to me. And Americans, not wanting ever to take responsibility for anything, are going to try and hold these very wealthy billionaires responsible for my inability to take responsibility for my own choices, of course.
Yeah, and Tyler,
that
then in that case,
opens
the
up.
fingers
I'm
should also
sorry.
be.
Jorge,
Wait,
hold on.
Katarina.
Kat- Katarina
Katerina,
first.
go ahead, Katerina.
I need to leave in 5 minutes. What this opens up, what we always complained about, is that there's no market to make real money on preventive medicine. But with these type of insights, there is a real pull towards utilizing preventive medicine more, which will open up markets for money and investments from big companies. So I think that's the good thing about it.
Go ahead, Jorge.
I was also going to say that the government also should share the part of the blame, because they have that stupid food pyramid that's been around for decades and decades. And at the bottom, the biggest portion of that pyramid is grains and pasta and
Very
bread, and
true.
all these carbohydrates that, have led to diabetes. And, it spikes your insulin level, it lowers your glucagon level. So basically, you can't access your storage of fat in your body. Um, it's almost criminal what they've done. And if you look at all we have the fattest people in the world. We're either number one or number two per capita. And it's all that starchy food that's the cheapest. So if you are low on the socioeconomic ladder, you have no choice. If you just want to survive and feed your kids, you have to buy all this crap. So that's why you have this disproportionate amount of poor people who are you have higher fat content than those people who can go out and afford organic foods and healthy stuff. Government is just as much to blame.
So
Tyler.
to be fair on that, Jorge and everyone that's been saying carbohydrate, the food pyramid actually came out in a time when breads, pastas, rice, all that shit was not processed to the degree that it is now. Carbohydrates absolutely do not cause, in any dosage, these health risks that you are referring to. Now, the fact that certain foods are cheaper and easier and more efficient to
But I love you, buddy, but
process.
I do have to interrupt just because, for clarification. It was the grains, the pastas, the
I
starches. Those.
understand, but here's
Now,
the
I'm not
thing about
talking about fruits and vegetables, which are also carbohydrates. Okay, so it's the type of
I understand. We're on
all
the same
carbohydrates
page.
are not created equal.
You're
So
basically talking about how they're processed
what I'm
because
saying is that the efficiency of certain foods and the readiness of certain foods to be processed in order to make more money, i.e., capitalism, is in fact the problem with the pyramid. If you ate a grain just off of a plant. There are certain things on that grain itself that make it so that the carbohydrates, the sugars, all the things that would spike your insulin, in fact, don't spike your insulin. They actually regulate your blood glucose levels for the next 4 hours and make it easier for you to digest things like fruits. Orange juice is not the same as eating an orange on like a biological level. So the fact that it's processed, the fact that certain things are taken out of and off of a grain in order to make bread is the problem. It's not the carbohydrate, it's not a macronutrient issue. It is a processing issue. And that has changed. Now, I don't agree with the food pyramid, but it has changed since the 1950s. It used to be much safer to follow the food pyramid than it is today.
If
you know
you
what I'd
follow
I'd
good,
have
there's
to
here.
Jorge, one
Go
second.
ahead.
I'd actually have to agree with Fox because to some degree what he just said at that very end is, and I just want to give him that one little that piece right there, is that it's transformed. And I know because I actually am a Jivamukti teacher, and the founder of the practice actually during one of our trainings gave us the history of the food pyramid. And you're both saying the same, similar and aligned in your conversation, Jorge and Fox, because we're vegan and vegetarian, most of the Jivamukti teachers. And the thing about this is that she explained to us how the history of that whole sort of process came forward, like how that all happened. And she took us back to like the 1900s, and what Fox was saying specifically about it's boiling down to the processing of how like it started to become something where they were enriching the grains, like they were taking out all this stuff in the processing and they were substituting stuff back in that was not necessarily, they were fortifying it, in other words, instead of keeping the natural stuff, they were taking and processing all the natural good stuff and then fortifying it by putting in other stuff in it. And clearly that's just not going to be processed by the body itself. But the one thing that I do know from the retail space that I found very interesting, as I've worked on a number of implementations for food and groceries in Europe and in the United States and Canada, is the layout of the grocery stores. When I was younger, my mom never ever shopped the aisles. She always shopped the perimeter of the store. Haven't you noticed when you go to a grocery store, the way it's laid out, that the elements that are natural or that are pure are in the outside perimeter? It's all the Coca-Cola and the sugars and all the processed foods are literally inside the aisles. And they're laid out in such a psychological marketing way that it forces you to, if you're not looking out for your child or for yourself and you're going in hungry, you end up going down that aisle down the middle, and you're not going towards the fruits, vegetables, organics, or like your not processed stuff around the edges, like the milk and dairy, cheese, meat, and all that other good stuff. Because meat and dairy and butter have been vilified. But the reality is that now you're also seeing where A2 cows from Europe are way better having dairy from A2 cows than other cows. And also it's better to have sheep and goat yogurt than to have like cow yogurt. So it's very interesting to see how like the whole essence of the food pyramid and how to eat nutritionally sound has gotten diluted by what the governments and the people, I guess the people in power want you to think is nutritious. And unfortunately, to Jorge's point, when you grow up in a marginalized situation, is very hard when they make the cheap food, they make the food that's accessible to you, not the good food. It ends up being like I want to find a vegan, I'd like to find a vegan like store or vegan like fast food joint or something like that. I'm just being cheeky, where like you could find it in Harlem or in Brooklyn or in like LA somewhere where the neighborhoods are worse. No, what you end up finding in those neighborhoods are McDonald's, Burger King, Taco Bell. What else? You find all of these really, really fast food restaurants. And I think it was Tyler that said, you're curious to see what it's going to be like when they start manipulating these facts around the corn syrup and all this other stuff, when they start to get people to be enrolled in their products. I think we're coming to an age of that's ending. And that's why I feel like it's Gremlins around 12 o'clock, where we're shining a light in a dark place, as Dr. Joe would say. And no one ever likes shining a light in a dark place. But the dark place we're shining it on is the inauthenticity of these Fortune 100 blue chip companies like Unilever, Procter & Gamble, Kraft. That's the ones that we're looking at right now. Coca-Cola, Nestle, these are those companies. And the challenge is they've gotten so big. How do we stop them? How do we take our consumer power back?
Well, as a product of a couple of the companies that you mentioned, um,
Okay. The customer
hmm,
for tomorrow, she asked what time she can.
we're not
I'm ready yet.
all that bad, but also a lot of things that we have done often
All
start
right.
with simple questions to
What time?
consumers to
1
solve a
p.m. Hello?
certain question, concern, time savings, things like that.
12 o'clock,
And
okay?
over the decades, things get modified and tweaked to meet a
Perfect. Thank you.
consumer demand, need, and interest, and then it just gets highlighted more and more and more. Um, I don't think we're all that bad, and I would have said this even if I hadn't made a nice living in these nice dividend companies. But I do have a concern about the food pyramid and the lobbyists and how influential they have been over the last few decades, because I think they have really tarnished originally what I thought was a good government initiative, but then it got screwed up over the years as as companies in the food industry and various industries started lobbying for the changes. Also, relating to vegetables and things like that, and everybody always talks about food deserts, blah, blah, blah. You know what? There once was a time wherever you lived, you had enough land where you could do your own garden. If you remember World War II, we had Liberty Gardens. Even those of us who've lived in various parts of the country, our families that were part of the Depression, I know a lot of people don't remember that, we had gardens. So a lot of these things are choices too. So I don't believe in the sad, these people live in a certain area and they can only eat certain things. You don't have to drink soda. You could drink water. And then you could use that to compensate to buy vegetables. So the big companies aren't all that bad. A lot of them have tried to do the right thing. And yes, there are bad people. And I'm totally pro-capitalist. Thank you.
Yeah, Robert, I'm also pro-capitalist, and I tend to get a little triggered when somebody just throws out capitalism out there. We haven't had capitalism in 100 years. So whatever it is, Fox, that you're referring to, it's not capitalism. It's something else.
Okay.
I'm
And
just talking about
hold on,
profiteering when I say
I
that.
hold
got,
on, hold on, hold on, hold on.
hold on.
Okay, so the
Hold on. I
definition.
have to interrupt. I have a call that I'm now 1 minute late for, so I have to end the room. So we'll pick it up again Monday. As someone's